Okay, so in this video, I want to talk a little bit about my personal journey studying Japanese and how much it cost me. At the end of it, hopefully you'll get some tips about how you want to study Japanese or how you don't want to study Japanese and what kind of budget might be required. Going right back to the beginning, many years ago, I first started studying Japanese pretty much as soon as I arrived in Japan. Not with any particular goal in mind, just because, well, I'm here in Japan, so I might as well give it a go. And what I did was I joined something called a nihongo kyoshitsu, which I think literally translates as Japanese class. Now, these are volunteer classes run by, well, volunteers of, shall I say, a more senior vintage. And the classes, they're usually free, maybe a couple of 100 yen to pay for some cookies and coffee during a break time. And they're pretty much open to everybody in the local area. And they're a great place to meet other foreigners that are living where you are. And it also, I feel like, gave me a good foundation in studying Japanese. Now, these Nihongo Kyoshitsu classes, not as a rule, I don't suppose, but in my experience, we used the Minano Nihongo textbook series, 2 textbooks, I think. Now, I mean, they're sinfully dull, but they did give us a good grounding in the basics, alphabets like hiragana, katakana, the basics of grammar. So I did that for about 2 years, really enjoyed it, met some lovely people. The teachers, I mean, they were far from professional, but they were just volunteers. You know, they'd probably, well, most of them had spent some time overseas. They knew a bit of English or some other language, and they wanted the chance to kind of try that out. The teaching methods, I mean, it was basically just sit down with a textbook, a group of you, go through some sections of the textbook, have a chat, have a conversation, really basic, casual stuff. But overall, it was a great time. And if you're new to studying Japanese, you haven't got much money, I highly recommend you check out Nihongo Kyoshitsu. It'll be up there on the screen somewhere. Just type it in or go to your local city's homepage and you can usually find a listing of Nihongo Kyoshitsu on there. So after 2 years of living in Japan, I decided to clear off and go and traipse around the world for a year. Eventually, I did come back to Japan, and it was at that time that I decided that I wanted to lend a bit more focus to my study of Japanese. And I did this by aiming towards the JLPT tests. Now, if you've never heard of the JLPT test, that's the Japanese Language Proficiency Test. This is basically the go-to test if you want a bit of paper to show to people, this is where my Japanese level is at. It takes place twice a year, covers the basics of like vocabulary, grammar, listening, reading, your knowledge of kanji. So the test comes in 5 levels from N5 through to N1, N being the hardest, and by hardest I mean really the hardest. After some consultation, I jumped in at level 3. So just remember, that's after 2 years of studying very casually at a Nihongo Kyoshitsu. I jumped in at the JLPT N3 level. So, in order to study for the JLPT tests, what I did was, on top of studying at home from a bunch of textbooks, I also went to a Japanese language school and took private lessons at I would say a kind of budget, sort of cheapish Japanese language school in central Tokyo. Now, these were private lessons because basically I'm an introvert and don't like interacting with people too much. And so yeah, private lessons at this school, they were about 50 minutes, I would say, and the cost of each lesson worked out at just under 4,000 yen. Now, the lessons you had to buy in a package of 8. So 8 lessons at 4,000 yen. So that came out at 32,000 yen. Now, I did this in the months sort of building up to the JLPT test date. Now, my JLPT test taking history reads a little bit patchy. N3, passed it first time, check me out. And I took N2 3 times, failed it the first couple of times and just scraped through, 3rd time lucky. So I took the test 4 times and I took a package of lessons in the build up to each of those tests. So those 4 packages of lessons cost me, I think by my rough calculations, 128,000 yen. For the sake of this video, let's just round that up to a nice number. Let's call it 130,000 yen spent on private language tuition in order to get me from N3 to N2 on the JLPT tests. Now, in order to take the Japanese Language Proficiency Test, you do, of course, need to pay a bit of money. And currently on the JLPT website, you can see that the test fee is 5,500 yen. So I took the test 4 times, just go based on the current test fee. I took the test 4 times, so that works out at 22,000 yen that I spent on registering for and taking 4 JLPT tests. Right, on top of taking private language classes, I also got myself a bunch of textbooks. Now, all in total, these kind of books that I've just showed you here, I mean, they're widely accessible from any kind of chain bookstore that you can find in Japan. You're usually looking at around 1,000 yen to 3,000 yen per book. For all the books that I've just shown you there, I think I paid around about 20, rounding up to a nice even number, 20,000 yen for that lot. All right. So the textbooks, the lessons, the studying Japanese, how much did it all cost me? So going back to the private lessons, I think, well, very roughly, I spent about 130,000 yen on those. Added to that the test fee for the JLPT, 22,000 yen. And then very roughly, the textbooks, 20,000 yen. So as a very rough total, my journey to N2 JLPT level Japanese cost me about 172,000 yen. So the big question, was it all worth it? Personally, emphatically so. And not just because of the level of Japanese that I attained, not that that's anything to brag about, but just on a personal experience, taking the nihongo kyoshitsu classes, the private classes, I met a whole bunch of great people. I had some great teachers, and you know, on a sort of personal journey, it kind of it tunes the mind. It creates a sense of discipline. It gives you satisfaction when you complete your goals. So even outside of the level of Japanese, the journey to N2 and the 172,000 yen roughly that I spent to get there was emphatically worth it. Now, on a more objective level, what does having N2 mean? In my own experience, actually, N2, well, a few years ago, I would say now, JLPT N2 is where you needed to be in order to open up doors to a career in Japan, perhaps let's say outside of teaching English. Now, if you are one of these English teachers in Japan that came to Japan teaching English simply as a way to get into Japan and you're looking to do something else, I would say that you really need to be aiming for JLPT N2. It starts to open up some doors. Now, personally though, when I went onto the sort of recruitment job hunting websites boasting of my new N2 qualification, I was really excited, but I kind of had a bit of a come down when it seemed that most of the jobs involved, I don't know, translating user manuals for some kind of air conditioning unit or something like that. Not particularly exciting in my own personal point of view, but it did open some doors. Bad news is though, that it seems like people are getting smarter these days, and if you go onto the job sites now, you'll perhaps find that more and more N1 is where you need to be in order to get into some of these positions, or in order to get into a lot of these positions. It's N1 that that the employers are wanting these days. Now, if you're familiar with these tests at all, you'll know that N1 is rock hard. I took a look at the first few pages of the textbooks and realized, well, probably I've come as far as I can come. And you know it's going to be hard when the locals are telling you that even they couldn't pass N1. That said, don't despair. With lots of hard work, patience, study, discipline, there are people out there passing N1. Now, on the other hand though, these JLPT tests and the certificates that you get when you pass them, they're not the be-all and end-all of it. There are plenty of foreigners here in Japan who A, are fluent in Japanese, okay, maybe the grammar's a bit rough around the edges, but so's mine, and B, they're getting on in jobs that they like, or at least they're using Japanese in order to work. Maybe it's a job they like, maybe they don't particularly like the job, but they're here in Japan, they're getting on with life, they're getting an income, they've got a full-time job, and they're doing it using their Japanese. So the JLPTs aren't the be-all and end-all. Anyway, if you're interested in learning a bit more about this and how much it costs to study Japanese here in Japan, there's an article on CityCost related to that. We'll link that in the comments section below. You'll also find on CityCost loads of other information about the cost of living here in Japan, so definitely check that out. And also, subscribe to the channel. See you next time.